Jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, Dungeons and Dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. Phantom powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in the towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Back in October of 2024, Michael Knowles had a very interesting and important interview with a gentleman called Chris Langan, and this got about 11 million views, and that number is going up. And in that interview that lasted about 2 hours, they discussed about a number of topics, primarily about God and spiritual reality, but also philosophy, spiritual warfare, politics, quantum mechanics, and similar things. So for the episode 162, we picked 45 minutes, the best part of that episode that we'll be commenting on. I have provided the link of that interview to this episode description. So whoever is interested to see the whole 2 hours is welcome to do that. I also want to thank the original uploader, CTMU Radio, who published this episode or interview, like I said, back in October 2024. It's also very interesting to see how atheists are negatively reacting and skeptics to this video, and how they're offending Michael Knowles' guest in this interview and saying all the bad things about it, but also people who are believers and who the followers of Christ. They found this interview to be very profound. So we'll be discussing on this interview. Like I said, it's a very interesting one. And before we start analyzing, I just want to ask Shaun, what is your understanding of this? For anyone who is a skeptic or an atheist or an agnostic and watching this, trying to find the truth with capital T, trying to find the purpose, trying to see if the universe had a beginning, if the universe had a cause, and if that cause is an intelligent mind that we call God. Yet in this interview, the guest will not so much be quoting the Bible, even though it will be using Christian jargon, using Christian vocabulary. So maybe in a similar way, when we analyze some of the Jordan Peterson's interview with, not interview, but when he was debating against those 20 atheists, I see something similar here in this interview, even though it's not a debate, that we have a guest who is highly intelligent. And again, he's not quoting the Bible necessarily, yet he's using so many biblical truths to tell people, yeah, this is the reality. Yeah, there is heaven, there is hell, there is God, there is Satan. So for me, that speaks volume for people who may be not ready to open the Bible and receive the wisdom from it. But they're like, oh, okay, but I want to hear an intelligent man. I want to hear a philosophical, powerful, and deeply rooted worldview. Why should I believe in God? Was that your impression, Shaun, as well, when you were watching this interview as well?
Yeah, I think that something that Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus can all agree on is that reality isn't made of just stuff, and that if you put an artificial cap on what constitutes reality, ending at just the material, then you cannot explain a lot of your experience in reality. And so I don't think that we need the Bible in order to believe that God exists. I don't think that we need the Quran to tell us that there is a God. I don't think we need any sort of divine revelation for us to understand that our reality is based on a mind that we can interact with and whose thoughts we are thinking after him. I don't really think that any of that is it's necessary to come from Scripture. Just logically, you can end up there by understanding what your experience is. Now, of course, as Christians, we would say that is insufficient to save somebody. You believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and they tremble, right? So we don't believe that that is sufficient for someone to come to the full knowledge of the truth. But in instances like this, we see just how without excuse the atheists are, because the logical methodologies that they employ to understand the world around them itself lends towards, if not proves, the existence of God. And so, yeah, we can agree with Paul that they are left without excuse.
Yeah, maybe something similar to Romans 1. Even though I remember my life without Christ, it was very hard to come to believe. So I want to always have patience and grace to people who are honestly interested to learn more, not just there to debate and argue and call people names. I'm not interested in that. But for people who are honestly asking for a question and not being understand, like, well, how can God be eternal? Or how can he love me from the beginning of the planet, even before the formation of the universe, without me existing there? Like, how could he love me? Or how can Jesus be fully embodied as God and as a human being? So I love talking with people who have honest questions and don't understand. I don't understand many things either, or maybe I understand them partially, right? Superficially. So I want to learn more with them, but not to argue, because I cannot push someone to the kingdom of heaven, just like people couldn't push me. I always had so many questions before coming to God. So I appreciate when people are humbling themselves and wanted to learn more. I just want to say that at the very beginning, Michael will ask his guest about the theory of everything. So I opened, well, I found different definitions, but I find this one on Wikipedia to be the most helpful for people who don't know. A theory of everything, TOE, is also called final theory, ultimate theory, unfilled field theory, or massive theory. So it's a hypothetical, singular, all-encompassing, coherent theoretical framework of physics that fully explains and links together all aspects of the universe. Finding a theory of everything is one of the major unsolved problems in physics. Or if I can dumb it down and maybe summarize, basically, who is behind all of this? How is all this working? What will be the one cause of everything? Who is that master clock master? I'm just saying, I'm using just simple terminology so people can understand. So, like I said, from the very get-go, the interview will start like that, at least from the point that will be fast forward. Okay, so time 16:52.
If we're talking about a theory of everything, the first question we have to establish, does God exist?
Yes.
Simple as
Yes.
that.
Well, it's the identity has the reality has an identity. Okay. The identity is that as which something exists. Okay. Matter of fact, when you say the word reality, you're naming an identity. You're identifying something.
I'm smiling because your answer on this is so beautiful. It just reminds me of Moses at the burning bush. And Moses at the burning bush says, "Who shall I tell the people that you are?" Talking to God. And God says, "Tell them I am that I am."
That's right.
I am identity itself. I'm being himself.
That's exactly right. That's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that. You see? So you come up with that identity and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions. Right?
Just the theistic religions? So I'm thinking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or are you talking also of, say,
Buddhism, Dowoism, Hinduism, Vedism? Of course, Hinduism and Vedism, they have a God. Dowoism, their central principle is the way, or the Tao.
Yep.
Okay, and they don't see Tao as God.
Yep.
And then in Buddhism, of course, you've got they are trying basically to achieve sunyata, or emptiness, right? Which is a lot of Buddhists don't even understand what that's supposed to mean. But once again, there's no God there. You can kind of read God implicitly. Some Buddhists, I've talked to Buddhists who actually think that there is a God in Buddhism of a sort. But it's, that concept of pure consciousness is what it is. Okay? And if you ask them, well, whose consciousness are you talking about? They will point at themselves and say, my consciousness. In a way, they kind of attribute the existence of everything to themselves. Okay.
I know. I've known a lot of people in Hollywood and Washington, D.C. who do the same thing, actually.
Well, that's right. That's why Buddhism is very fashionable among some of those people.
It's a good.
Okay, from the very get-go, and of course, just like when we were interviewing that video by Dr. Jordan Peterson, we're allowed to disagree, not just agree with anyone whose videos we're assessing. So from the very beginning, Shaun, guest Chris says that this reality, or the concept of reality, can be found in all religions. So when Michael's asking to clarify, well, do you mean just those who are monotheistic, who are coming from the biblical worldview? He says yes, but also from others. So this is where I think, I don't know the background or the spiritual position when it comes to Chris, his guest, the gentleman who has IQ 200. I don't know if he's a follower of Christ or he's simply a spiritual or religious person without any specific commitment. But from the very beginning, we can see, okay, he's not just affirming the biblical worldview, but he's also accepting and affirming, all the other religions and mythologies. Can this be confusing for atheists or agnostic watching this video and saying, well, I need something more specific. I don't have time nor desire to read 200 holy books. And we can agree, just like with so many other people, all the holy books contain elements of truth. But how can we, without any bias, maybe encourage the audience who are not following Christ yet? Yeah, you're free to experiment. You're free to learn and read any source of information. But how can we encourage them to also include the Bible and research Jesus' life seriously?
Well, okay, so first of all, I agree with what they said in Vatican II, that all religions are essentially attempting to worship the one God, that is he is the fundamental ground and architect for our reality and the cause of our being and the grounding of all of our experience. And so I agree with them that in principle, that is what all the major religions of the world are doing. To the extent that they do it properly is a separate question. And so it is not only possible, but it is it cannot be any way other than when you have religious systems that have contradictions between them, that one is in error, at least one is in error, in order to show the truth of the others. So what I would say to somebody who is exploring this is to, go crazy like a kid in a candy store. Just kind of observe these, all of these different traditions and what they say about God, and the things that are deeply true and moving. Those things are those which are the most accurate, and the things which they find contrary to our experience as creatures, those are the things that are probably where you're running into traditions that are built up around the core idea that need to be refined. Christianity, specifically the older traditions of Christianity, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, the Reformed tradition, all of these are drawing from specifically the first 400 years of Christianity, the golden era of Christianity, in which these big ideas were coming around and people were wrestling with these things. And there was a lot of wrestling between Christianity and Judaism at that time. Islam wasn't quite on the scene. If you want to understand the wrestling with Islam, probably move more towards the 8th century, especially in the Western world. You'd be moving towards like the 12th century, where they're really interacting with Islam. But I would encourage them to read those dialogues, read some of the writings that have been in order to understand what is Christianity. How does it view itself as separate from Islam? How does Islam view itself as separate from Christianity? Where are the places that they agree? And I think it's going to be very intuitive, the places that they agree. If I were to boil it down to one, apologetic quip, I would say, which I don't think is helpful, because it's basically a gotcha. Here it happens to be true, but it's like, well, then how do you correct for this when you hear it in other instances? But here it happens to be true. Which of the messianic figures claim to be God, right? And so in Buddhism, you don't have anybody claiming to be God. Buddha says that he found the way. In Islam, Muhammad doesn't claim to be God. In fact, his experience of God is one that is horrifying, upsetting. He struggles with anxiety and suicidality. He is not somebody who is able to really even conceive of God and interact with him in any way that's actually relational. And so in that sense, Islam might capture some of the hesitation of the person who is an agnostic or an atheist moving further into this experience and asking, like Moses did, "Show me your face." Only in Christianity do we have somebody who says, "I am God," comes with all of the characteristics that we would want to predicate to God. The humility, the dignity, the lovingness, and the full authority that Jesus comes with. And so in that, I think that we can point them toward Christianity, but to do it as just like which one claimed to be God, like a gotcha thing. I mean, to me, even though it happens to be right, and I love the brothers who do that, I think that is probably not helpful, because you have somebody who has spent their entire life fighting against religion that is now coming to the point where they just like stumbled upon it, and they're like, okay, well, I understand that some of this is now true, and it feels like they're being sold something instead of coming across it organically, which I think is the most important thing. Because if we don't come across these things organically, what ends up happening is either A, we get to enjoy our experience, which is, well, we've always affirmed these doctrines, but then we stumble across the grounding for these doctrines in some ancient text of some church father hundreds of years ago, and then we're like, oh man, this is so edifying. Like, finally, we find like this is irrefutable argumentation for the grounding of this doctrine. Praise God. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is you have somebody who builds their whole theology around an iron grip on a doctrine that they haven't grounded. And that's how you end up with fundamentalist sectarians who don't question their own dogmas. And so I think that that's very unhelpful. Typically, people who come from New Age, agnosticism, atheism, they don't find themselves in the most holistic, organic traditions within Christianity. They find themselves in the most fundamental. And I think that's because they come to a point where, like, okay, what do I have to believe now? Like, I'm convinced, I am persuaded that there is a God, and I need to get right with him. What do I need to do? And typically the ones who have the most specific answers are your King James onlyist, your super sectarian Baptist or Pentecostal. And of course, they have a very rigorous idea of what it means to be a follower of Christ. It just so happens that none of it is organic or holistic, and it doesn't match the human experience.
Thanks for that. I also want to say that it's interesting how he mentioned Dowoism. I've been trying to find a couple of brothers to help me assess this topic and try to find any potential connections between Taoism and Christ. And there's a book called Christ, the Eternal Tao, and I don't know much about it, but I want to take time and assess it one day and make an episode with some guys who are more knowledgeable than me. And interestingly, for me at least, that Orthodox brothers seems to know more about this topic than Protestants. So I'm going to try to find at least one Eastern Orthodox brother to come and help me assess this and compare it to Christianity. Okay, let's continue.
Boy,
Yeah,
that's a good point.
So yes, but anyway, when you look at what they've all got, you come down to the same thing. All right, everybody has the Tao, or the way. That's the way reality works, right? And everybody has sunyata, which is pure syntax, right? Pure cognition with no instantiation, no content, right? And then you've got what the Abrahamic religions call God. It's all the same thing, okay? But what are its properties? Okay, are its properties such that you can deny the existence of God, or are its properties such that God definitely has to exist? And the answer is God exists.
God definitely
the
has
properties of the central substance and central principle of reality, those properties are attributed to God, including, of course, things like you have the three O's: omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, but then you've also got consciousness. God has to be sentient.
So we're not just defining God out of existence. Sometimes you'll hear people say God exists, but they'll give God such a weak and shallow definition that the God that they're describing has no relation to the God that we conceive of. You're saying, no, this God is God himself is conscious and therefore personal?
Yes, you can establish a personal relationship with God. We're images of God. You know what an image is? It's basically the product of a mapping. God maps himself into each human being, right? That's a very personal thing that God is doing for us, right? And I don't understand how anybody can say that it's any different. We reflect the structure of the universe. Each one of us, we're carried by it. Everything we do, we exist in a medium. What is that medium? Right? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
What holds it together? What is the unifying coherence, the source of coherence of that medium?
Now, is your claim a pantheistic claim that God is the universe, or the universe is God, and that's that? Or no? Or is God outside of the universe and created?
God is greater than, well, what is the universe?
Damned if I know.
You ever hear of the simulation hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simulation hypothesis is basically the idea that the reality we see around us, physical reality, is simulated on some sort of an automaton or a computer.
Yeah, some aliens somewhere have just they've fooled us.
Right, exactly. Eat a piece of licorice.
Before one launches into the simulation, one needs a little sustenance,
Okay, so anyway, The idea is that you've got some kind of an automaton running. You've got a simulation running on it. And God, it's more panentheistic. You know what panentheism is?
I do. I think I do. But that means that we are in God. Let me know how I've gone wrong. We are in God, and God is in us. And it is not merely that God and the creation are one and the same, but they are quite related. Is that something approaching panentheism?
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
There's the idea is that you've got the physical universe that you see around you, but God is not confined to the physical universe.
Okay.
See, there's an ordinary pantheist assumes that God is somehow confined to the universe, that there is just what we see around us, and God is in every piece of it. God is distributed over it.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a little bit more complex than that, because this part of the universe that we see around us cannot exist just by itself.
Yeah.
Okay? There are certain things that it entails. And when you go into those entailments, that's how you get to God. That's how you get to the identity of reality. Okay? And now to get back to the reality of self-simulation, or at least that's what I call it, self-simulation. But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect. Okay? And God, it captures both of those things. It captures both the display and the processor.
What do you mean? I hate to put it in.
Well, I mean, okay, here's the display. You realize the display contains states.
Yep.
Okay, you see things, the objects contain states. States are static.
Yep.
That's why they're called states.
Yeah.
Okay, static. How do they change? Well, they have to be processed. Something has to process.
Yeah.
And in the calculus, for example, those are tiny little infinitesimal intervals. Okay, but they are not actually contained in the states themselves. They have a neighborhood, a little tangent space or what have you, where you can sort of draw little vectors that suggest that some kind of processing is going on. But the idea of being a state and being a process, those are two different things.
Yep.
In the ordinary way of looking at it. Okay, it turns out that you can't properly describe reality and causation at all unless you put those things together somehow. And that's what it takes God to do. Okay, God provides the processing functionality for your state. You have an internal state, an external state. You're a material human being. Right? Like, to explain how that is changing through time, and maintaining its coherence through time, even as it changes, that's what you need God for.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're speaking about panentheism. They were speaking about simulation theory. They were speaking also about God's attributes. Now, my I won't say concern. I would just say that maybe I would need more clarification from Chris is when he speaks of simulation. I'm immediately thrown to a couple of things in my mind. First, those managerial simulation video games that I used to play when I was younger, when you're building palaces, roads, providing food for your people, games like Civilization, like Caesar, things of that sort. You're building their temples, their armies, their everything. But also I'm thinking inevitably, not that I want to, but I'm thinking about Matrix. But when I think of Matrix, then it seems like, well, then that's a negative side of this so-called simulation. It's like, it's not real. It's almost you're a prisoner there. And you would be a prisoner if you're in a bondage of sin, but not because you're put on earth as the so-called, let's call it playground for us as God imagers, because he put us here, for a reason such as love. And he said at the beginning, because he wants to have relationship with us. In a theory of simulation, unless explained further, to me, simulation almost seems like a trick, like it's not real, or it's like the person behind it would almost seem to be almost like a puppet master, like almost something politicalized, almost something like, shadow figures pulling strings behind all of our views and not knowing what's happening. Yet God, even though he hides a lot of truth and keeps it as mystery for us, at least in this side of reality, I wouldn't see this planet or our lives as simulation. I would see them as our side of reality, from our side of the universe, in this dimension, where God is leaving us to live our lives and intervening, divinely intervening in our lives, pulling us from sin, pulling us from death, pulling us from the claws of Satan, and doing stupid things, transforming us into His likeness to pull us out into the kingdom of light. Yet, I wouldn't call that simulation. I would call it's a temporary playground. You can call it in any way. So is it just me, Shaun, or when you hear it's a simulation, it's usually people who are into conspiracies, New Age, who use this type of terminology than people of faith? Any Abrahamic religions, they don't use usually this terminology. So how did this goes through your mind if someone will tell you, hey, Shaun, do you believe that this is just a simulation, this is not real, and whoever is pulling, the strings, maybe just testing us or playing with us? How would you react to that?
Well, so I don't know if maybe I'm the odd duck. In most cases, I guess I probably am. But I think that, thank you. But
then I'm too. So it's like, that's fine.
That's all right. So I see the simulation theory as probably the most helpful tool in explaining the classical understanding of Christianity. That everything that we see around us, before us, none of this is in a raw state. None of this is in a state in which it only exists as a means to further progress what will eventually happen. All of this is carefully curated. And so, like he was saying, the states of matter, they don't exist independently of their purpose. And so, like, when you're looking at the world, you don't see anything that exists for its own purposes. I mean, the desk that I'm sitting at doesn't exist on its own, and it doesn't exist by virtue of it just wanting to exist. It has to be compelled to take the form for the duration that it will, for the purpose that God intended it to. Now that doesn't mean necessarily like a puppet master thing, because I think that the simulation theory also has a great answer for that. I don't know if you're one for playing online games and that you play with a bunch of people, but when you're playing an online game, you have a device, whether it be a computer or some sort of gaming platform, or even your phone, and there's a certain amount of agency that you have within that's afforded you by what you're playing on. And then on the server, there's a whole host of options and possibilities and all those things. But the only way that you can actually interact with the world around you is if there's an exchange of information happening between your device and the server. And so the server is the one that's hosting the reality, and your agent or your device is just your own personal agency within that reality. And so the server itself, the larger, the broader game, is not controlling your decisions, but it is limiting the decisions that you have, such that they would be meaningful. Because if I'm playing a game and I'm riding a horse, and all of a sudden I decide that my horse is now a starship and I'm flying off into another that doesn't make sense within the context of the game. So in order for me to have meaningful decisions, they have to be arbitrarily limited to just a few decisions, the outcome of which I can foresee. Otherwise, I can't be held responsible for my own. If it's just decisions that are thrown in front of me and I have no idea how it's going to play out, then the decisions would be completely arbitrary. There would be no reason for it. It would be completely random. So the decisions that I'm given, I have to be able to at least intuit what the consequences of those decisions would be. And so that's why I think that the simulation theory gives us the most appropriate analogy for the way in which our own volition interacts with God's created world.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So I'm glad to hear that your version of simulation is way different than David Icke's when we were covering him recently, or what is seen in Matrix. So it will be a divinely made simulation where you're not being deceived, you're not being misled. It is real, and it is a type of reality where God comes also to intervene and dwell with us, but still allows us to use our free will and live the ways that we choose to. So even though it will be, in your understanding, simulation, still everything is real because it's meant to exist by God, if I can paraphrase. So it's a way different thing than with David Icke or, like I said, Matrix and things like that. I can accept that. So yeah, thanks for clarification.
I certainly agree with that entirely. And so I might not be sophisticated enough to parse all of the quibbles that there might be, but broadly speaking, as a Christian, so much of what you're saying resonates as obviously true for me. Mm-hmm. The idea that, well, I'm a member of the body of Christ. The idea that God creates the world in this great act of love, this great act of charity.
Self-love.
And yeah, well, that,
self-love. Don't forget, you're an image of God.
Right.
So in loving Himself, God loves you.
And God, and
you're supposed to love God back.
Right. And this ties into something like the Trinity, right? The idea that God is three persons in one divine unity. So all of this is making a lot of sense to me. So now, how do I make sense of consciousness?
Well, ordinarily, you know what quantum mechanics, you know what quantization is?
You know, I know the word.
Yeah. Well, you decide what the ultimate irreducible objects are. Mm-hmm. You know, those are the quanta in terms of which you reason. It turns out that in order to quantize that theory that I was talking about, that theory of identity, where you've got the display and you've got the processor, mm-hmm. and it's handling both. It turns out that in order to handle both of those things, you need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right? They are identity operators. Okay, the identity operator has, basically it takes input from the outside world, recognizes it or accepts it using syntax, processes it, and then returns it to the world as external state. Okay, so things come in, then they're processed, right? There's throughput, which is, you could call that the subjective or internal state of the identity operator, and then it's returned to the external universe.
But are you attributing now?
So what I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes. Generically conscious. But it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta, okay? These are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that, you know, the quantum rules, they're probabilistic.
Right.
They don't actually determine events, okay? So what determines events? We do. And we don't know how we do it, but we do it. When everybody's will is put together, we're all creating the best possible universe we can for ourselves. And God is what harmonizes all of our different perspectives and makes things happen for all of us at the same time. And if we were doing things correctly, this would be the best of all possible worlds. Sadly, however, we oftentimes make mistakes. And that's what we have to get out of doing, but we can't get out of doing it until we understand what reality is, what we are, and what the relationship between those two things is.
Now, you've mentioned two things that raise a new question for me, which is you mentioned this idea of simulation, just the simulation or self-simulation, and you've mentioned us doing things. So then it would seem to me we have to tackle the question, do we really do much of anything at all, in the sense, do we have free will?
Yes, we do. Okay.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I always thought we did.
Well, yes, we have to have free will. Oh, I was discussing with you earlier the idea of a fixed array. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, now, modern physics know, basically what you've got is you've got a bunch of quantum fields in superposition, and then those fields consist of little fluctuations, little quantum fluctuations, right? Where is the fixed array? We were talking about a manifold, right, with a bunch of zero-dimensional points.
Yeah.
Okay? Those two things are not compatible. Okay? Quantum field theory and that fixed array manifold where you can parameterize all of the causal functions using the manifold, that doesn't work. Okay, those two things don't fit together.
Now, you explained to me when we were speaking about this earlier. You put this into even more layman's terms, and it has already flown out of my head. Can you put that into more basic terms? What you've just said.
But what was it you need to understand about this? What are you actually?
Why are these two concepts you're describing? Why are they not reconcilable? What is the problem with these?
Oh, I explained that to you already. That's one. Okay, all right. It consists of zero-dimensional points,
yes.
limit points, or cuts. I told you what a Dedekind cut was, right?
Yep.
These limit points have zero extent. They're exact locations, and that's a cut. You're actually, you've got something on one side of the point, and then you've got something on the other side of the point, and any line that you draw through the point itself is going to be cut by the point.
Yep.
Okay, so we call that a cut.
Okay.
Okay, and the cut is zero-dimensional, which means that it has no extent at all. It's an exact location. It's precise.
Yep.
No extent. It's not smeared out. Okay.
Yeah.
If you take all of those points and you add them together, you get zero.
Right.
Because no matter how many times you add zero to itself, you just get zero. And because the manifold consists of those points, that's what you have to do to find out the extent of the manifold.
Okay.
So what this is telling you is that the manifold itself has zero extent. There's nothing there. So the real manifold of classical physics is a paradoxical construct. Okay?
Okay.
So that's why those two things, that's why that doesn't work with quantum field theory and the idea that things are quantum fluctuations and fields. That's why, as a matter of fact, that particular concept of the real manifold, that doesn't work for anything at all. It's a conceptual convenience. We can reason about reality in terms of it. And we can actually get to some very interesting conclusions.
Okay.
Using it.
You're right.
But it doesn't work in the long run. Okay? And because it doesn't work, most causal functions, of course, are parameterized in terms of this manifold.
Okay.
Okay? In other words, you take, you've got X, Y, and Z axes, and the forces that exist, the forces that cause things to happen, right? Those forces are all directed along one of those axes. That's what a force is, right? Okay? When you take away the points, those zero-dimensional points, now all of that disappears. The basis of causation has just fled the coop on you, right?
Okay.
Because you no longer have little points, the tails of the little vectors that point there. You can no longer parameterize your causal functions using those points and vectors. So what do you do to get causal functions? Well, it turns out you have to use something called advanced causation. And you combine that with advanced causation is called retrocausation. You combine that with ordinary retarded causation, and you get something else entirely. It's called metacausation in the CTMU.
So
when he was talking about retarded, so that's how I felt last 10 minutes listening to him. I'm like, can you please dumb it down more for us? Okay, so he was speaking about the reality, about free will, and I'm glad that he also mentioned that, and I fully agree. He didn't go full deterministic there like some of our Reformed brothers, so I'm so glad that he affirms that. So basically, Shaun, our reality exists because this divine agent, who we call God, put things into motion. He set the laws of the universe to move. He gave us free will. He put us as his images in this realm, in this dimension, to by using our free will to do good or bad. Whenever we do good, we are trying to embed this so-called simulation, even though I'm not a fan of that word. So we're expanding God's kingdom by loving each other and using free will to do good. Whenever we're not doing that, then we are opposing God's commandment. Yet this cosmos and this reality are not falling apart, even though our sin is causing so much of pain and suffering that God will have to come, and he's coming to reconcile and heal everything. Yet because God is the sustainer of everything, and because he's divine and bigger than our mistakes, he's still allowing these things to go in motion despite all of us. What are your thoughts on the last several minutes that he was talking about everything, including free will, reality, quantum mechanics, and everything else?
Well, I'm so happy that he took his really sophisticated philosophical language and brought it down to a lower shelf. The unfortunate thing is that that lower shelf exists 2 floors up in a place that I don't have access to. So, I'm not a philosopher.
You have to get to know the key masses so you can enter that door, go through the door, and get information.
Right. Yeah. No, unfortunately, I'm not sophisticated enough in philosophy or physics in order to be able to really grapple with what he was saying there. But one of the things that I'm really happy he talked about was the idea that consciousness is dispersed throughout all of creation. That is something that I do know a little bit about, and that the people who study consciousness, they basically come down into 2 camps. You have one camp that says that consciousness doesn't exist, that it's an artifact of biology, and that essentially at some point we're going to find that there is some sort of biological mechanism that it works like a mirror that projects back onto the mind its own thoughts, and so consciousness doesn't actually exist. And so there's a lot of those who study consciousness from a biological perspective that say it doesn't exist. But then there's another camp that says, it's panpsychism, that everything is conscious to an extent, but that consciousness doesn't, like he was saying, it's underdeterminative. So most of the extent of consciousness is the ability for electrons to follow the rules within the reality. It doesn't actually, it has no agency. And the difference between us and them is that we have agency because we're made in the image of God. And then you can have a hierarchy of consciousness in which, we can look at a cat or a dog and say, well, they exhibit consciousness to a much higher degree than my table does. And so consciousness can kind of become a spectrum where we're at one end of the created order, and say a rock is at the other end of the created order. And so the rock is conscious in the sense that it has the ability to be acted upon. And we're on the other end, whereas we are almost all of our consciousness is for agency. So we are the actors. And of course, we are embodied. So obviously we're acted upon all the time, but not only acted upon. So there's a threshold at which when there's enough consciousness, I don't know, there's enough midi-chlorians that essentially you become an agent. You pass this threshold and you gain, well, don't gain, but you exhibit agency. And so I really like that theory of consciousness, that it is an aggregate of all of the consciousness of the stuff that you're made of, but it's also qualitative, that there are certain things that are more conscious than others. For example, I mean, we know that like whales are, they have, I mean, if a cat is so far above a rock, a whale is equidistant from the cat, on that same spectrum. We know that whales, they can be self-referential. They have language. They communicate. They give each other names. I mean, it's just crazy how conscious they are. And yet, I don't know anybody except for maybe just like a crazy PETA person that would say that a whale has consciousness in the way that a human has consciousness. We have, Coco the gorilla, who recently passed. That they're able to communicate and identify themselves. We know that they're self-referential. We know that they have an understanding of who they are in the world, and yet we can still look at them and say, well, but wait, we don't have this, whatever it is that we have, whatever makes us special. You don't possess that to that degree, and yet we know that. Coco the gorilla on IQ tests was, I think, scoring around like 80, which is I mean, 10% of the population scores lower than that. But it's not just intellect that makes you an agent, right? A conscious agent. There's more to it. There's something qualitatively different. And so I do like the explanatory power of panpsychism, and I'm glad that he brought that up. But I question the premise of some having more consciousness than the gorilla. Have you seen on TikTok? Yes, I actually agree with you there. But no, yeah. So panpsychism has really powerful explanatory. Has a lot of explanatory power, but it's not the full explanation because we're still seeing things that it can't account for. Like, what is the difference between the way that we're conscious and the way that whales or gorillas are conscious? Even though, I mean, you could say, well, we have more of the things, and so we're made up of more material. But it's like, have you seen a whale? Have you seen a gorilla? Obviously, they're made up of more material. Whales have much larger brains than we do. I mean, yes, our brains are technically larger in reference to our body, so they take up a larger amount. But I think the largest brain to body ratio of any animals is like a gray squirrel. So like, obviously we wouldn't say that a squirrel is conscious even in a way that like a whale or a dolphin is conscious. So it gets into a lot of problems, but I do think there's a lot of explanatory power there.
Okay, thank you. We have 6 more minutes in this segment, and then we'll skip down to the second segment, which is shorter than the first one. And then we have the third segment, and we'll be done.
It's referred to using 2 operations, one of which is called conspansion and the other which is called sub-operation, called telic recursion.
Because when we're talking about free will, often the conversation, especially these days, becomes this sort of shallow discussion of, well, this caused this, and I'm going to describe a totally deterministic system, and so as a result of this causing this, causing this, causing this, you don't have free will. And you're saying cause is actually more complicated than just cause.
That's correct. In other words, talking about free will in those terms is osios, means nothing.
Yeah.
You can't get anywhere with it, okay? Reality is actually generative, okay? It's not just fixed manifold. Everything is being created all the time, not just our states. Our states are being recreated, right? You know, I can cross my legs, I can uncross my leg. That's the changing state.
Yeah.
But the medium around us is changing. When I look at you, I'm seeing Michael Knowles, okay? I'm seeing you sitting there. But that means that I'm seeing your boundary. I'm seeing what distinguishes you from the external environment, right? There's a medium around you. So I have to be regenerating that at the same time as I'm regenerating your state in my head, okay? When I say regenerating, there's a reason I'm doing that. I could also say I'm recognizing Michael Knowles, I'm recognizing your state right now, but I'm also recognizing the state of the medium around you, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to distinguish you from the medium and you wouldn't exist at all.
Right. Well, it's sort of like a little baby, right? Has trouble recognizing the limits of things and recognizing what some individual object might be from, you know, the glass on the table. They have trouble distinguishing those things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Okay, the baby has to learn to distinguish those boundaries. And it has to receive the right visual cues at the right age so that it can actually learn how to do that.
Yeah. So now we're at metacausation. So what does metacausation have?
Causation works from past to future. Okay, metacausation works from past to future and from future to past in a closed loop. It's called a conspansive cycle. Okay. So that's basically what we have to do to quantization in order to make causality work. And of course, when I say causality, I mean metacausation. Okay.
So how does,
because ordinary past to future causality parameterized by a fixed array, that doesn't work.
So I get past to future. This seems pretty simple. I pick up the glass of water, I put it over here, and now I remember 2 seconds ago that water was over here, and then I caused it to go over there.
Right.
So how do you cause something to go from the future to the past?
It can't go anywhere unless there's some place for it to go.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah.
This is in the universe, everything changes with time. You're actually, you know, in the theory of relativity, for example, all the points are events.
Yep.
Okay. And that means that there's a time parameter involved. Okay. So when you take that glass and you move it from there to there, okay, you think that there's a point right there where you're going to move that glass. That's false. Okay. The point to which you are going to move that glass is actually in the future. When you pick up that glass, it's still in, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. And then getting back to God, I guess we're always trying to get back to God. God is outside of time and space.
Well,
But
God distributes over time and space, and there's some left over. Time and space is static. It's a display.
Yeah.
Imagine that you're a little homunculus inside a computer display, like the Matrix, for example, okay? God not only distributes over that, but there's a whole other domain where God exists. And that's the processing domain. That's the non-terminal domain in the CTME. We're in the terminal domain, right? And most physicists, when they try to reason about the terminal domain, they reason under physical confinement. Okay, well, I can only look at physics, and I have to use what I know about physics, what I can observe about physics, to explain everything else that I explain. So they have that kind of explanatory closure going right there.
so speaking of this non-terminal domain, in a really basic question, I'm not going to ask you if I'm going to go to heaven or hell, but will I go to either heaven or hell?
Okay, before we finish this short segment with heaven and hell, Shaun, when he was speaking about, of course, this is simple for all of us to understand how things in the past or in the present can affect things in the future. But then he goes even further. He says, yeah, but also some stuff or events in the future can cause or affect things in the past if they have, let's say, a channel or a tunnel or a way to affect that. So I was immediately thinking about Jesus' sacrifice that affected not just people in Jesus' time and not just us 2,000 years later and all the people in between in this timeline of 2,000 years, but Jesus' sacrifice has affected also all the saints in the past because they were looking in the future to the promised Messiah who will come and atone for their sins. So he's just, let's say this is a timeline, straight timeline. If Jesus' sacrifice happened here, he naturally affected all of the people in his timeline moving forward. But because God is divine and nothing is impossible to him, his sacrifice also affected all the people who came before him, even though his incarnation did not happen in their time. I'm not talking about Christophanism when Jesus would show here and there in the Old Testament, even though he did many times. I'm talking about him giving life for the sins of the world. That happened only once. So that managed to happen to affect, all the humankind also in the past. And for the saints who trusted God, that applied, well, it was applied even before through faith, but it finally came to fruition when Jesus came and gave his life. So we see here through a very biblical, I would say a very good biblical example that these things are not impossible. So beyond this example, I don't know how else things from the future can affect things in the past, but at least for me, I was thinking biblically, well, this is a perfect example how God can do what to me would be impossible. Do you have any comment or maybe another example like this one?
Yeah, some of my favorite kind of movies and literature are ones where we start off at a certain point and we see characters acting in a certain way, and we believe that we understand all of the moving parts and the dynamic relationships and everything that's going on. And then as we progress through the story, when we get towards the end, some event, something, or maybe even a story recontextualizes everything that happens. And so all of a sudden, the meaning of all of the events that had happened in the past has now changed. That we thought that these were relationships and dynamics that we were just being told about in order to further the story. But in reality, this is laying the groundwork for the thing that will come at the end. And so that is a way in which something that, maybe not a way, but a model that we can look at, in which something that will happen in the future changes in some way what happens in the past, whether it changes its values or it changes its meaning, it changes the telos. And so I totally agree with that. That something that is future can change what's happening in what happened in the past without necessarily changing just the mechanics of it. It changes it on a more substantial level than just the mechanics. I also like how he says that causation is not just mechanical, and I think that that's a lot of the problems that we run into in earlier philosophy, was that all causation was something where one thing interacts with another thing, and it leverages its force in such a way to cause that other thing to behave in a certain way. And so, that's where you get into the understanding of, well, are we free, or is everything determined? How does that work? And when you think about causality being agentive, I'm gonna use agentive, but when
I invent words, so you're fine too. So
yeah. So when we think about that it's not only mechanical, and when you think that there's that in every situation you could have an intersection of like 5 or 6 different causal factors influencing the situation, and at least one of them includes agency, free will, then regardless of where you stand on the determinism versus free will or libertarian free will side of the spectrum, which I think are probably both in error to some degree, you end up understanding that free will is an instrumental cause, even if it is not the only cause. And it is probably the most determinative cause, even if it is not solely determinative.
okay, we have a minute and a half to end this first segment.
You will persist after you die. Okay? Where you go depends on who Michael Knowles really is. And you would know that better than anyone.
Yeah, I hope I know that better than. But you're telling me I'm going somewhere.
Yes.
You're confident of that. I don't just evaporate. I don't just turn into oblivion.
Well, you can. If you displease God, that's exactly what's going to happen to you. God is going to cut you off, and he's going to say, I can't see him anymore. He's going to turn away from you, and then you won't be able to reunite. Salvation will be impossible for you, because salvation means that God has got to pull you back into himself.
Right.
Okay, but God doesn't want to see you anymore. He doesn't even know you exist. He knows your physical body is there, but he's not interested anymore, because you hate him, you deny his existence, you offend him, so he's not going to look at you, right? So now what happens? Well, okay, you're dead. You still want to live. There's something in you that still desperately wants to live, so it's still going to be there. What happens now? Well, you try to create your own world for yourself, but if you're a bad person or you're an evil person, what kind of world is that going to be? It's going to be an evil world, and that's what we call hell.
This is what John Milton says in The Mouth of Satan. He says, the mind is its own place, and it can make a hell of heaven or heaven a hell.
Now you got it.
It reminds me of Dante also, this idea of God turning away. The very deepest part of hell is Satan frozen in a lake of ice of his own making because of the flapping of his own wings, because he's apart from the warmth of God.
Precisely.
Okay.
Okay, any comment on this extra biblical yet very interesting imagery and information when it comes to heaven and hell, especially hell? I find this very interesting. I didn't hear this type of thinking or philosophy or theology before. This is very interesting. Like, God chooses not to think about you because you're his enemy. He knows you exist, but he chooses not to know you anymore because you're detached from him anymore. So far, so good. But then he says, but then you don't totally die, like you're not annihilated. So then you create your own version of reality, because if you're evil and separated from God and you cannot be good, so then you create your own evil reality. So that's how. So I'm like, wow, I never heard that in that way. And then they give parallels to Dante and John Milton. So any comment maybe on that?
Yeah, I mean, any way that we view hell is going to be extra biblical, because the Bible doesn't give us enough information to actually be able to suss out what happens there. We have a few things, like the fire doesn't die, the worm doesn't die, and that it'll be a place of torment So there are a few things that we have, but that's totally not enough for us to be able to understand everything that's going on in it. So we have a long tradition in Christianity of people trying to trying to think about, trying to grapple with what does this look like when it's actually incarnated. What would this look like, and how would one get there? How do we have a loving God torturing and tormenting people? And the way that has traditionally been most accepted, especially in the West, is that, well, these afflictions are those things which you are afflicting yourself with, just like Dante, where he sees that Satan is the cause of him being stuck in this icy hell. Milton, obviously very, very influential, that the mind can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell. C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce, where we get a picture of what his version of hell is, and it's so mundane that everything is gray. Nothing has any vibrancy, and there's not another person that you can see for miles and miles away, because everyone gets exactly what they want in hell, and yet people can't stand each other because they are so self-centered that they've all moved further and further away from each other. And so you have all of these and maybe this is really a commentary on where we're at here in this, postmodern age, but you receive all of the physical pleasures that you could ever desire, and yet you're dead inside. You have no peace with yourself. And so I think that this is something that has been wrestled with and grappled with in especially the Western tradition. And unfortunately, I think that it gets dismissed too easily because of the fact that it's extra biblical, but these are people just trying to apply biblical truths to understand how exactly would that work out. They're not saying this is the way, but this is an ongoing dialogue of trying to understand, well, how would it work? And so I don't think anyone necessarily has the one right answer, but this is the broader tradition in which we consider, how can a loving God exist who wants nothing but the best for you? And yet, in hell, we confess that people are going to be tormented and tortured, and that they will experience some degree of agony. And how do you reconcile those two? And I think they've done a wonderful job of doing that.
Okay, thank you. The second segment is a short one. It has to deal with psychedelics and demons, so it will be a fun one.
Rain, I'm sunk.
That's correct. But of course, what they say is that some of these medications can actually be good for you, in terms of you may have certain things, certain mental routines that are destructive and that aren't good for you, that can be interdicted by psychedelics, for example.
What's your take on it?
My take is that could very well be true. The psychedelics could open up a gap between your temporal consciousness and your non-terminal consciousness, right? Your mind it's an extended, stratified thing. We're just using our terminal consciousness right now, but there are other aspects to your consciousness, and you can actually get, certain kinds of insights and communications if you just open up a gap. You understand? And let them come in and fill the gap, and then, you can see them as they would ordinarily.
So the things that people see when they're on psychedelics, I usually write them off and I tell people, you're just hallucinating. But you're saying maybe that's not all it is. They might be seeing something real.
Well, once again, what is reality? Is reality just stuff out there? No, reality has a mental aspect.
Yep.
Right? And once you admit that basically everything has a mental aspect, then of course what's going on in your mind is real. It takes on a kind of reality. It's not the same as physical reality. It is nevertheless real.
Are angels and demons real?
Yes. Yes.
I think so too. Is there a fear that if you take some of these drugs, you might be letting in the wrong guys?
That's a problem, isn't it? Yeah. And that's a problem that I think a lot of people have encountered. You have to be a certain kind of person to be able to handle these drugs and not be sucked under by them. Okay, because once your mind is messed with in that way, something else, it's weakened, you're not exactly in control anymore, something else can come in and grab it. And if you open up that gap that I was talking about, what can come into that gap might not be good for you.
God is real, angels are real, demons are real. Is the devil real?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, it has to be. We were talking about Michael Knowles being surrounded by the medium and, you've got a boundary.
Yeah.
Well, God has a boundary too. He's got a very tight boundary. He's perfect. He can't take anything resembling imperfection, right? He
Right.
can't take it into himself because that would be a contradiction.
Yep.
Okay, so God needs an antithesis in order to be properly defined. What is that antithesis? Anti-God or Satan. So it definitely exists. Now, Satan isn't coherent because, he basically hates existence. Nevertheless, he gains coherence through human beings, through secondary tellers, as they're called in the CTMU. In other words, Satan can nucleate power structures, for example, things like corporations and governments, where you've got people in there that can be acquired as resources, and there's a kind of skeleton, a corporate organization, a governmental, organization that's holding them together, holding them in place, that can be exploited by Satan.
So you're not describing Manichaeism. You're not saying there's God and then the opposite of God and there's some maybe equivalence between the two. You're saying that God, obviously there is an antithesis. Christ has an antichrist, but that it's incoherent. And are you saying that he sort of that the devil sort of lacks substance, or that's why he needs the humans?
I'm saying the devil lacks coherence. Coherence is what brings everything into superposition, right, with itself. In other words, it allows something to, this is going to sound a little bit paradoxical, allows something to communicate non-locally with itself,
okay,
right? All of its possible states are in superposition. They exist all at once, okay? And this is pretty much inescapable.
I'm reminded of a writer, René Girard, who had this idea that the devil, being who he is a kind of contradiction of being. And it seems to me what Girard says is something similar to what you're saying, which is that he requires us to kind of do his dirty work.
That is correct. Yeah. We give existence to the devil, to Satan. Now, you have to make a distinction, however, between Satan and Lucifer, for example. Now, Lucifer is an angel. Okay, that's what he's supposed to be, a fallen angel.
Right.
But nevertheless, an angel, right? The angel of light. Okay, the morning star, whatever you want to call him, okay? That is not Satan. Those are two different things.
What's the difference?
This would no doubt be classified as a heresy, for example, in the church.
I did not bring the Inquisition with me yet. They're not behind the curtains here. So what is your idea then? Because traditionally it's understood that Satan and Lucifer are the same person. You're saying they're different.
Yes.
How are they different?
Well, Lucifer walks the fence. Basically, he's the angel of light. What does light do? Basically, light is what brings reality to us. Okay, he's walking the fence between good and evil. We're all in the same boat. We all walk the fence between good and evil. Okay, how can we do that? Okay, well, through Lucifer.
Right.
Yeah.
And the grace of God.
Through Lucifer. Basically, Lucifer has been exiled here because God won't tolerate the imperfections of this place. Okay, Lucifer handled that for him. And that's why Lucifer is what he is. That's how he fell down here to earth. Okay, he's performing a function here. That function is light. I mean, I don't know. Do you follow what I'm?
I do. I'm still trying to parse the difference a little. If Christ says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven," is he describing Satan here, or he's describing Lucifer, or both?
If Christ were here and I could hear his exact words, I could perfectly interpret them.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But it's very hard to do that, 2,000 years after the fact, right? With all the different translations and interpretations that the Bible has undergone. Okay.
And
so what I like to do is I like to approach it from first principles and look at it logically, right? Rationally. And what does logic tell us, if anything? Okay. Well, logic tells us that basically God needs a negation, but that negation is too incoherent to function in this world, except through human beings.
Right.
What's the rest of it? What's the rest of it all about?
Yeah.
And Lucifer is a concept that is better suited than Satan to that purpose.
I love this point that he's incoherent, that the old devil is incoherent. That I read some poem, I think it's a modern poem, that says, sin is a big problem because it's evil, but it's also a big problem because it's such a waste of time. It's so incoherent. When you think of when you take the suffering out of it and you just think of people committing any particular sin, it just doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, the sense that it makes to them is they're enjoying it. They're hedonistically deriving pleasure from the sin. And of course, we all, have the same pleasure mechanisms.
Yep.
So we're all tempted to commit sin, but we've got to keep a lid on it. There have to be limits. Okay, and what I'm worried about is that now Satan controls the world, and there are certain people involved in running things who don't have those limits.
Well,
they're so rich, they're so powerful that they don't need those limits anymore. So they've more or less thrown them off.
Now, there's nothing new to the idea that Satan or Lucifer, or let's call him just the old devil himself, is the prince of this world, and that the rich and the powerful they do his bidding, and they're bad people, and they follow their lowest appetites and their pleasures, and they can be sadistic. And so that's been going on for a long time. Is there something particular about the moment we're living in that says it's actually gotten much worse?
Yes, that is, we've had so many technological advancements that now the technology of surveillance and coercion are such, and these people are so rich, they're like black holes gravitating all the money to themselves, that they're unstoppable. Okay, and because they're unstoppable, because they actually run everything, okay, we are endangered by them now.
Okay, I'll stop here as the end of the second segment. So just to remind the audience, Chris was talking about certain psychedelics opening that gap in your door, probably something like ayahuasca or ayahuasca. I'm not sure it's one of those two. What I didn't understand and what I didn't like from the very beginning is that he first seems to encourage that to people, like, oh, it can be beneficial, it can be good. Yet then when Michael presses him a couple of minutes later, he says, yeah, it can bring demonic influence in your life. So you have to be careful, like, how you fight against this, or if you can take it. I would still say, if you're a Christian or not a Christian, from our perspective, it's never good to be influenced by those psychedelics. So stay away from that. The second thing is that he doesn't see Lucifer, which is just a King James Version translation, but the angel who was like the bringer of light, right? A morning star, while the Christ is called the morning star. So he doesn't see him being the devil or the Satan himself. And then this is why I'm thinking he may not be what we call born-again Christian. He has this religious biblical ideas, but for him, if he studied the textual criticism and the problems between the manuscripts, I don't know if he fully believes in the Bible being the word of God and divinely inspired. And then he finishes this second segment by speaking about people, powerful, rich people who are into hedonism, who serve Satan, and who are doing his bidding, to quote him. And I fully agree, because we don't even know what's happening out there. I mean, just look at current political climate, wars all over us, inflations, protests, riots all over the world. Like, something is boiling and cooking. And I also have to disagree with him on one more thing, when he said, in order for God to either exist or to function, something like that, he needs someone opposite than him who portray, let's say that God is plus, he's positive, so God will need someone to resemble him in a negative context, to be that negative, the minus one. I don't agree. God didn't plan for Lucifer or for Satan to fall and be kind like that. God did not create him for that purpose. God does not need anything or anyone. God certainly did not need someone like Lucifer to fall. He created him for beautiful purpose. But because he fell down, it's not like God needed him to be on the opposite side of the camp. But God, being sovereign and knowing what will happen in the future, can use even something horrible like that for his own glory and our own good. We don't see and we don't understand everything fully. There are glimpses that we can and do understand in this reality, in this dimension, but one day we will fully understand. So this is probably the only segment where I disagree with at least half of the things he was saying. Not that I'm better than him, that I'm smarter than him, not anything like that. But again, Lucifer not being Satan, I fully disagree. Him saying that the gap can be positive, that psychedelics can open, I also fully disagree. And him also saying that God in a way needed Satan, I also fully disagree. This is not one of those epic stories of good and evil. It's not like that. God did not start that way. That was not in his plan. Okay, Shaun, what's your take on this?
All right. So from my perspective, I think that psychedelics, just like narcotics, are something that inevitably are going to be used for the medicinal purposes. And I think that they do show very strong aptitude for being able to help with psychological illness, especially stuff like PTSD, bipolar schizophrenia. But just like with narcotics, there's such a prevalence to abuse them. And I think that we would both agree, if somebody is suffering from severe pain and they're on something like, oxycodone or Oxycontin or hydrocodone, which are very, very powerful drugs, but prescribed by a doctor, we would advise them to use those medications within the limits of how the doctor prescribes them and not to exceed those limits. And that abuse of those medications is tantamount to pharmakeia and will get you demonized very quickly, as we can see happens in the communities with people who are addicted to drugs. We would say that things like heroin, which traditionally had been used to treat pain, but they were so addictive that they no longer use them to treat pain, that we would say stay away from. Psychedelics, I believe, are going to be treated like narcotics in a way that they're going to be given in microdose form at the lowest effective form, and that just like with pain medications, we will advise people to take the prescribed dose and not to go over it, and to caution them that any failure to comply with what the doctor is giving you that's opening the door to the demonic. So I see both sides. I see it's inevitable. We know so much about what these psychedelics can do and how they can overcome strongholds in your mind that are just purely psychological in form. I mean, there's really nothing else to it, like PTSD. They've been extremely effective in treating PTSD. So I don't see how there's an avenue where we don't end up using them. But I think that we would have to use the same cautions that we use regarding other drugs, that what you're doing is you're playing with a portal to the demonic. But we do the same thing. I mean,
yeah, but you're basically saying that if you take it, it will be under medical supervision. You'll have to have
right.
prescription, stuff like that. But just to merely buy something, in most cases illegal, go home and get high and open the door to this, we would both agree we would here disagree strongly with Chris, with all respect to him, of course, because I don't know if there's anything that could be a safe zone or safe gap. If you start opening that, in a way, maybe not perfectly the same, but in a way, it's like playing with Ouija board. When is it safe? It's never safe. Yeah. Once when you start, that's it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you exactly. Yes, as long as you're taking it under prescribed doses with stuff that's been through clinical trials, and you're taking the minimum effective dose for you, and you're not taking it recreationally, I don't see a problem with it. But as soon as you go outside of those bounds and you want to administer your own dosages, and you're taking it for the purpose not of treating some sort of illness that you're suffering from in the minimum effective dose, but you're using it for some secondary reason, which is just to get high or to trip, now we have a problem, because you're dancing around the door of the demonic. The second thing that I want to say is his insights to Lucifer and Satan. I think that he has some really good insights here. The problem is he doesn't reconcile the two. Lucifer walks the fence because he owns the fence. If you are on the fence, you are not in the kingdom of Christ. If you're in this world and you think that you're just going to live a good life, Satan owns the fence. You can't just sit on the fence the whole time. You can't just say, hey, I just lived by the light that I had and I did the best that I could for people and I wanted to be the best human that I could be. That's not enough. That's not sufficient. So I think what he's trying to do here is try to separate humanitarianism from just blatant sin. But as a Christian, we wouldn't necessarily see the difference in the two. One is hedonistic, and the other one is hedonistic through more of an altruistic or masochistic means. That, well, look at all the good that I do for people, and look at all the suffering that I undertake for all these people. And it's like, well, are those good things? If it's not grounded in God, it's not a good thing. Like I guess I wouldn't advocate you to stop taking care of the poor, but what is the reason that you do it? Do you do it because you're giving glory to God? Do you do it because you see that people are made in God's image and you want to help them out? Or are you only doing it because you want to gain notoriety and credibility for yourself? Well, in that case, what you're doing is actually just another act of evil. So even though the outcome might be from a secular perspective good, it's terrible for your soul. Because what you're doing is now you're running from God and building up a wall from God, saying, look at how good of a person I am. I don't need any of that stuff. I don't deal with all that sin stuff. I've made up for any of my shortcomings because I've helped so many people. That's not how God sees it. God sees it as you're an evil person building a fortress to keep him out. When he talks about the problems with the translation and stuff, I agree with you. I don't think he really understands textual criticism, that we can, in almost any of our modern translations, we go back to the original text. So I just don't think that he's maybe dug that deep into there. Obviously, he's smart enough that if he ever dealt with it, he would come away knowing everything. But I just don't think maybe that's been an avenue that he's wanted to go down. I agree with him about the evil in the world, that we are at a place now where the possibilities of sin are so great. I mean, with technology, with the wealthiest people in the world having more money than anybody has ever had in the history of the world, and more influence, especially with globalism and the ability to communicate across national lines in an instant. There's so much ability for people to engage in just copious amounts of sin, and cause others to stumble and fall into sin, or enslave others in such a way. Like, for example, human trafficking. Human trafficking is not something that happens person to person. Human trafficking is something that goes through a chain of people. So the person who's probably responsible, as far as the person who's probably funding all of these terrible things that happen, may not even live in the nation in which they're taking place. So it's like, yes, there's so much capacity for people to sin that yes, this moment in time is very different. And finally, the idea that God needs Satan because he needs somebody to rule over the other portion, because he's so pure and so holy that he's unable to come into the earth. Well, it's not that he's so pure and so holy he's unable to come into the earth. What it is that he's so pure and so holy that the earth would get nuked if he came near to it. So out of love for humanity, he had certain rules and regulations in which people would be able to commune with him, such as setting apart sacred space. And the penalty of not doing that was, I'm coming and you're going to die. Like, prepare to get dead. And so God doesn't need Satan. He employs him. He uses him, but he doesn't need him. God didn't need Satan to use any of his prophets. There was no necessity for Satan to be there. And yet, out of the kindness of his heart, out of the lovingness, he chooses to use something that's even fallen and broken and hates him in order to show us our own sin and bring us back to God. So, I think that those were, I've highlighted some areas where I would disagree with what he said, and some areas in which I think that he's got some valuable insight.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, the last 13 and a half minutes. We'll probably break it into 2 or 3 segments.
Still within the realm of what Wikipedia is going to call it conspiracy theories. Do you believe in aliens?
Well, I will say this, the intelligence community, large sectors of it believe in aliens.
Really?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's a big, I mean, they're constantly discussing these things. Yes. And if you look at the global elite, and you wonder, well, I don't want to blame the world banksters for this, that's a conspiracy theory. Then who is pulling all those strings? Okay. Could there be another kind of entity, aliens, demons, whatever? Could there be something that's pulling their strings that the global banksters know about, right? And they're taking orders from, but they're being totally concealed and hidden from the public. This is a viable hypothesis, and it's one that the intelligence communities don't reject.
It's funny you pose
which is, kind of neither here nor there, because the intelligence communities themselves could be run by aliens, for all we know.
People are going to be laughing when you say that there are aliens that
let them laugh, okay? But they won't be able to come up with any supporting argument against what I'm saying. They don't know enough.
Well,
they're ignorant.
It's funny that you mention aliens and demons in the same breath, because I don't particularly believe in aliens. I mean, what do I know? There are a lot of things I don't know about, but I certainly believe that demons exist. I'm pretty confident that demons exist. I'm less confident that aliens exist.
Well, but the thing is, a lot of people are reporting that they're seeing these UFOs and
the
other strange alien suggestive phenomena.
Yeah. So what is something like they call it the tic tac of these weird UFOs that seem to violate the laws of physics?
Correct. Basically, they look like little blobs of light or spheres that can commit these maneuvers that are totally against the laws of physics as we understand them. Right? They look like they have mass, but somehow they're not subject to inertia. They can turn on a dime on a right angle and continue at the same speed. They can accelerate at a tremendous with tremendous G forces. Okay, how can that happen?
Do you have any theory?
Well, yes, I do. But it's it's fairly involved. Basically, when you reduce the world to telesis, and you understand that reality consists of a merging of mind and matter. It's an interplay, of the two.
It's not just stuff, and it's not just pure abstraction.
It can be real without necessarily being a completely physical phenomenon. Okay? In other words, there can be a mental component to it. Right? And that is what I think is happening here. I think that actually there's something to it. The number of people that report UFO incidents is simply too large. People aren't, they're not all liars. They don't run around risking their reputations by saying, okay, I'm going to make a nut out of myself and say, these UFOs exist.
But couldn't they just be nuts?
Well, I suppose they could.
But you're saying there's too many.
I'm saying it's very improbable that they are. I mean, because not that many people are that nutty.
Well, my friend Andrew Clavin, who you met earlier, he has this party trick, which is he's a mystery writer, and he has written ghost stories and things. And at dinner parties, he'll say, hey, I'll ask a random person, he'll say, hey, have you ever seen a ghost? And he says, a lot of the time, people will say yes. And throughout history, people report having seen a ghost.
That is correct.
And he says, too many people are saying they've seen a ghost for there not to be ghosts, or something like a ghost.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
Have you ever seen a ghost?
I've seen things that look like ghosts. No.
Such as?
I have. I've seen things that look like UFOs too. They're there. I mean, if you're not a very observant person, you'll never see anything like that. If your mind is completely closed and you just screen all that stuff out, you'll never see anything like that. But if you're an open-minded person and you're observant, you will see things like that eventually. Okay?
I don't want to put you on the spot to give an example, because sometimes if I describe an experience that I would call religious or numinous, sometimes people say, well, describe it. And I say, I can go around the edges, but it's somewhat ineffable. Could you describe such an experience?
Well, yes, I could describe such an experience. Okay. Well, on the UFO thing, I was working for the Forest Service near Lewiston, Montana. In the Lewis and Clark National Forest, not too far from Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I was in charge of a mountain range called the Little Snowies. Okay, I was the fire guard, the regional fire guard for that area. And I was alone up there. There were campgrounds, and I'd go up and tend to the campgrounds. and make sure that they were all cleaned up and everything. And that was one of my duties. And I had to be a fire guard, which means putting out forest spotting and putting out forest fires and things like that. One day I was up there in a Forest Service pickup truck at a certain campground, and I was there, and suddenly I look up, and I say suddenly, it was just in the sky. I became aware that it was up there, and I looked up. There's this huge spheroidal, but elliptical, not a perfect spheroid, like a saucer that was turned partially on its side.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that must be one of those, lenticular clouds that I've heard of. So I looked at it and I figured, okay, now I wonder how this evolves in time. Totally changeless. I actually took sticks and I tried to use parallax to figure out, what is this thing? Why isn't it changing? Why isn't it moving? Why is it completely featureless and metallic looking? Well, it wasn't any lenticular cloud. Okay, and I literally stared at it for a long, long time before I finally just got, okay, it's there, got back in my pickup and drove away.
Did you call it in or anything?
Well, I've told a number of people about it. Yeah, I didn't call it in, no. It was irrelevant to the state of my campgrounds,
It's funny you mentioned, because sometimes people say, this is a little different than seeing a UFO, but somewhat related. People will say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Christianity because I don't believe in miracles. If miracles really happened, we'd all know about it. And if you look at the gospel accounts of miracles happening, the wildest part of it is not the miracle happening. It's the fact that when the miracle happens, everyone treats it as this miraculous event, and then 5 seconds later they move on, and people treat it as totally ordinary. And this happens again and again and again. It's even happened. I would say that I've experienced things that are miraculous.
Yes.
And even in my own life, not 1 week later, I'm just going about my business as though it never happened. Or I'll forget that it happened. Or anything. It was a miracle, shouldn't that?
Yeah, but you don't deny that they happened.
No.
Right.
No,
That's
I don't.
the important thing. Because then you're really nuts.
Yeah. when you deny that it happened,
Yes,
right? Because you're.
Okay, I think we can just briefly analyze this section. I really liked it. I just want to say how Shaun, I didn't see this section when I was previewing this week and preparing this episode. I didn't see him speaking about the UFO, but this so perfectly aligns with our episode in 2 days. For the audience, well, they don't. I was about to say for those who don't know, but none of them knows. There'll be 4 of us, 2 guys from Faith Unaltered, bigger podcast than ours, and Shaun and I will join them, and we'll be talking about the real eyewitness reports when people would see ghosts, demons, shadowy people, UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever. So we'll be combining again people's testimonies. We'll be comparing them with the Bible as much as we can, because we're not told a lot, but also Shaun and I will combine all these stories and try to parallel them and analyze them through what we've been doing the last several months by doing so many of these supernatural, cryptid, spooky stories and trying to dissect them better. So we'll have a fun episode that won't be so much theological or nerdy. It will be more like relaxing, fun, and a little bit spooky when it comes to dissecting these things. And now I'm hearing Chris's supernatural experience when he saw this kind of UFO just floating there and not doing anything, not making any sound, not doing anything. And I'm like, wow, this comes almost coincidentally, but in a positive way for our episode that comes in less than 48 hours. I will also invite the audience to plug in a little bit late. I have interviewed Dr. Hugh Russ on the same topic 2 years ago. That episode is the #1 episode from all the episodes we did on the podcast in the last almost 2.5 years. I spoke with him about Genesis 6, about giants, Nephilim, and the second segment was about the UFOs and aliens. And he gives his scholarly analysis and view as a Christian scientist. So that will be very interesting for guys to watch that and observe. But yeah, I just want to say how I didn't know this part of Chris's segment that he actually saw something yet. We'll be talking about this in great length in less than 48 hours. Shaun, okay, we're not talking about any personal experiences now because we want to save that for Sunday. But for people who may be, again, skeptics, agnostics, looking for truth, if they would hear someone talking about aliens and yet they talk about God in the same topic in the same episode, do you think this can help them through these supernatural topics be more open-minded to God, or they would be like, what, you believe in God, you believe in aliens, you believe in miracles? That's too much for me. I'm done with you guys. Like all of you believe in these Bronze Age fairy tales from shepherds that put the Bible together, alter the content, and now you believe they're aliens. So do you think, as someone who spends some time in New Age and as not following Christ, that presenting material when it comes to God, angels, Bible, but also in the other side of on the other half of the episode, someone like Chris speaks about seeing aliens. Do you think that can help the case when it comes to agnostics and atheists, or not?
So, when you're talking about an atheist or an agnostic who denies the existence of angels, demons, UFOs, aliens, any of that, you're talking about a very, very small sliver of people who are just not paying attention. They have a fundamentalist faith about the nature of reality, much more rigorous than any fundamentalist Christian. They are willing to deny not only their experience, but the experiences of people around them. Those kinds of people, I don't care about reaching because I can't change their heart. Like, it's going to take God to change their heart. I don't care about reaching those people because it's not going to be until they're ready and then out of that state before they're going to actually engage intellectually with the information that we're providing on this podcast and that other people provide, especially if it's well within their wheelhouse, maybe to a greater degree on other podcasts. What we are mostly doing is demonstrating that the Christian worldview, despite what has been said about it, is very comfortable accommodating these phenomena. And I think to the agnostic who's open-minded, to the New Ager who believes in angels and demons and aliens, but maybe doesn't have them in precise categories like we would in Christendom, I think this would be very refreshing for them to say, wait a minute, there's actually a place where I can take all of these things and dump them into this box, and the worldview fits all of it very well. And so that's what I'm encouraged by. This is the podcast that I wish I had when I was in the New Age. This is the type of information that I wish I had available, because to me, it was those Christians are so closed-minded, they don't even understand the world around them. And yet here we are talking about things like angels, demons, UFOs. We talk about cryptids like Bigfoot and Mothman and all kinds of stuff. And we make room for it within our worldview because our worldview has room for it, because this is the ground of truth. And so in my opinion, I think that what we're doing is probably the most persuasive thing possible to somebody who's agnostic, is to give them a container that they can feel that they have some sort of ownership over, that they can look at it and say, wait a minute, this accommodates everything I believe and my intuition to worship, which is why they're in the New Age to begin with. This native born intuition that I have to worship something greater than myself, it is fulfilled here, and it gives me a link going way back to not only to early Christendom, but essentially back to Moses. That this is grounded in the origins of the human experience with the divine. And so in my opinion, I don't think that we're setting up a stumbling block for them at all. I think what we're doing is tearing down barriers and saying, come.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We have 6 or 7 minutes left, so I think we can just finish that segment at once.
so beholden to some preconceived notion of the way things
That's
are.
correct. So who are the real nuts? Obviously, they're the people that are doing all the talk about the alien conspiracy theories. Okay? There's obviously something there, or the number of people that report them wouldn't be reporting them. There are people in the CIA who actually claim to have been abducted. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but they're there. Okay? And we're not talking about small individuals. We're not talking about low-ranking individuals. We're talking about high-ranking individuals.
These people, not just that you've read a book about, you're saying these people you've talked to. Or
People that there was one of them in particular that I was actually, somebody that I knew was trying to arrange an introduction to this person. And I said, well, okay, so he's in the, CIA. Is he going to tell me the truth? I'm not in the CIA. Is he going to tell me the truth about anything? Well, no, actually what he wants to talk about is abductions, because, he and his wife were actually abducted by aliens, and he wants to talk to you about it. And I said, well, is he going to tell me the truth about anything? Well, I don't know. I said, then I don't want to talk to him. Okay, I don't want to talk to him at all. There has to be some kind of understanding that I'm not going to get lied to. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time, because I'll never know whether he's lying or telling the truth. So if somebody isn't going to commit up front to telling me the truth, I don't have time for him.
If he were a really smart liar, he would have just said, I will tell you the truth, and lied even if he wanted to.
I suppose so.
So
I mean, that's what they do in the CIA.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
right. It's sort of the job, right? If you're a spy, that's
correct. And you lie your ass off
Yeah.
at every available opportunity about everything.
Right.
Okay. They don't all do that. I think there are a couple of people that I sort of trust when they talk about certain subjects. But, by no means are they entirely in the know even. I mean, if you're in the CIA, you're basically a bureaucrat.
Right.
Right. You look up, you see, okay, well, we I've got my superior, and then I'm looking up farther. Now I see the director of the CIA. Who's giving that guy his orders? It ain't the president. I mean, that's suddenly you're in a void. Who's running things? Okay, as far as most of these guys are concerned, it could be the devil himself that's running things. They just don't know.
It's so amazing that you say that, because it takes it full circle to the point that when I hear, okay, this so-and-so is actually really beholden to so-and-so, and this person is actually beholden to this person, and I know that that's a fact, because you can just see it in politics. You can kind of go to an org chart and kind of point to it, right? But then eventually saying so-and-so, if in a really powerful position, they're actually responsible to so-and-so and accountable to, and you think, okay, at a certain point you think, I don't know, I have no way of verifying this could be it. And then when you go all the way back to, and so-and-so is really just answering to the devil, now you've got me again. Because I read that in my Bible. I know that that's true. I know that he's the prince of this world.
Well, yes, and they've been. By the way, I mean, there are accounts from biblical times and pre-biblical times that involve UFOs, things in the sky that show up during critical battles, for example, and turn the tide. Right. This goes all the way back, to the Vedic religion, the pre-Hindu religion. There are all kinds of people who have reported these things. They end up in various religious scriptures, including Christian scriptures as well, in some cases. So
I can't think of an example of an extraterrestrial appearance.
Well, no, they're basically attributed to God. These are the interventions of.
Man, I didn't plan to stop, but I hope he won't go into Ezekiel 1, or he won't go to the angel of death, or he won't go to the Christophanies, or he won't go to spiritual warfare where God bestows special power on prophets like Elijah, or people having epiphanies, revelations. None of these were aliens. But again, because he's not fully committed to Christ, he, in his worldview, is allowed to add these things and change them. So I just want to see what he's saying.
Angels or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You can go back. You look at the Mayans and the Incas and people like that. There are also, there are pictures on temple walls, right? There are carvings that seem to suggest that these things actually existed.
Well,
or at least were perceived.
Right. No, there's a great meme that I'm really taken with. It actually has to do with IQ, which is a nice coincidence. But I love this meme because it's got the really stupid guy at the one end of the bell curve, and he's sort of drooling, and he says, "Duh, all the bad stuff is because of the devil." right? And then you get up on the bell curve into, I don't know, say IQ of 120 or 130. And it's the really smart guy, the egghead with the glasses. And he says,
No,
well,
that's just the start of the danger zone.
yeah, the danger zone is
The danger zone.
when you're just smart enough, but not smart. And those guys, they say, no, actually, the devil doesn't exist. And actually, we're all just sort of bags of chemicals. And no, this is all, it's all rationally explainable. And blah, 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 blah. And then you get up to the guy at the really high end of the IQ curve in this meme. And he says, no, actually, the bad stuff's just from the devil. And he agrees with the guy at the other end of the but it strikes me that there's really something to that. Roger Scruton, the late conservative philosopher, he said that the job of the conservative intellectual is to articulate things that the common man knows intuitively.
That's right.
And it's especially interesting when it comes to you, because you're a guy at the very highest end of the intelligence spectrum, and you've lived the life of a blue-collar guy.
That's right. I wanted meaning in my life. It's like I say, I wanted meaning above all things. You got to make sure, that you decide up front when you're a young man, if you want to accomplish anything, who do you serve? Truth or mammon? Okay, you don't have a choice. You do have a choice, but you can't do both at once. Okay, it's either going to be truth, which is the same as God. I mean, truth and God are to some extent synonymous.
Yeah,
or
good, the true, and beautiful.
Or it's going to be money. And if you choose money, if you choose mammon, then you're going to be serving mammon, who happens to be the globalists at this point, because they control all the wealth and power.
Okay, I think we can stop there. The rest of the video is available. Again, I had provided the link. So I think this was enough, the gist of what I found most interesting when it comes to spiritual reality, religious worldview, angels, demons, God, Satan, philosophies, anything else, and then including the latter part that has to deal with aliens and UFOs. I just wish they, Michael, maybe press him more to say, well, these supernatural experiences with UFOs and aliens, and the engravings that Chris mentions that are there in many ancient cultures. I wish Michael push him a little bit more to say, well, do you find any parallel or any correlation between them and demons? Because that's the general Christian view. And again, when I interviewed Dr. Hugh Russ a couple of years ago, he gave a scientific explanation why it can be just aliens from other planets. These are demonic beings, demonic entities. So I was a little bit there disappointed because they didn't seem to make that conclusion, or at least Michael didn't push him enough to make that statement like, yeah, we do believe that these interdimensional beings exist, but we wouldn't necessarily see them as originating from another planet. We're not Mormons. We think they're the fallen ones. But overall, a very interesting and pleasurable discussion and interview. I think both Christians and non-Christians can learn from this. It's 2 hours again, but we're dissecting only 45 minutes. And I think even though, as with Dr. Jordan Peterson, as with so many other people, it's fine if you disagree, but at least there's some good portions where they can stimulate your mind and challenge you in a good way to be open-minded for some other stuff, to extend or expand your worldview, to see God in the new light in your reality. It's not just what you think, black and white, and that's it. So that's how I'm getting this, like, oh, thank you for clarifying some things. My faith is not shaken. On the contrary, it's just explained through philosophical and logical way. Even though I, again, disagree with few things about few things when it comes to Chris, but still, I found it very beneficial for our faith. Any concluding thoughts, both on this segment and also on the whole interview, Shaun?
Well, I think what this segment really showed is what we're dealing with through the whole interview is that our guest Chris here doesn't really have the maybe he's drawing too narrow of categories and doesn't allow any reconciling between the categories. So he wants to attribute UFOs to something that is, maybe not entirely spiritual, whereas as Christians we would understand them to be spiritual. And in that sense, I actually think that it is right and proper to interpret what Chris said as, that there are UFOs that show up in the Bible. Well, in that sense, yes, they're spiritual beings that show up in the sky. And that's what we have, in Ezekiel 1, we have spiritual beings that are showing up in the sky. And so when we say, well, this is the methodology in which we interpret anything that's showing up in the sky, we know this is not something that is mechanical. We know that it's not something that's biological. So this has to be something spiritual. When we use that, we look at the events in the scripture, and in most cases we see them as these are messengers from God. So these are positive spiritual beings that are rightly described by some atheists and conspiracy theorists as UFOs showing up in the Bible, because of course that's what they are, but they don't understand what we mean when we say UFOs. We don't mean a mechanical or biological vessel. We mean something that is entirely spiritual. And so now when we look out into the world and we see UFOs, that's also how we interpret them. These are spiritual things. If they're not coming with a message from God, then obviously we would presuppose that they are demonic in origin. And that's just the way that we view it. And so we have a much more holistic and organic way of looking at these events within our worldview. So yet again, we make room for and we accommodate these within our worldview, not in spite of the boundaries that our worldview creates, but they actually nest quite nicely within.
Yeah, thank you for those concluding words, Shaun. I'm actually happy we finished before 2 hours. I was hoping we would have finished before, but we had so much fun, and I think it was important for us to go through all the 45 minutes I planned. Again, everyone, if you didn't subscribe or like or share our material, please, everything is for free. Please do us a favor and to help break the YouTube algorithm. If you find this interesting or beneficial or as a blessing in your life, feel free to share with those around you. Again, in less than 48 hours, Shaun will join me, Tyler, and Joshua, and we'll be joining with guys from other podcasts, and we'll be talking about some of the true eyewitness reports when it comes to ghosts, demons, cryptids, and different type of interdimensional and spiritual entities. And that's a big if you think you have seen something unusual that fit this category of spirits, demons, baby angels, cryptids, Bigfoot, UFO, whatever it is, please, you can either comment, or when we go live in less than 48 hours, you can comment in the live chat. And if the message is respectful and within the context of the episode, we can actually share your story on the screen for all the audience to see that. So please keep that in mind. And if you think it's fun, you can actually be part of that episode that is coming again this Sunday evening. That being said, God bless you. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Shaun, I think that unplanningly, if that's a word, the episode that we're doing Sunday will be a nice sequel to this one. So here we're finishing with the demons and aliens, and now we're gonna continue having a couple of hours just speaking about that on Sunday evening. So I didn't plan this. I didn't know it will turn out that way, but I thank God, because it will be a fun episode and a different one that we usually do on Sundays, because the type of episode we do on Sundays doesn't necessarily fit what we do on Fridays. Fridays are more casual, more dorky, if I can put it that way, more like fantastic, more horror. That's why I call them Fantastic Friday. Sunday, I leave it for more scholarly episodes, but this one will be a really fun episode with just a couple more other guys. So don't forget to subscribe and like and join us in that live segment. Shaun, thank you so much for this couple of hours. Thank you all during the live session and for your kind comments. They mean us a lot. Whenever you pray for us, whenever you compliment us, whenever you encourage us, whenever you like, that means a lot to us, especially to me. Trust me. So whenever I'm discouraged, if I get anything like that from your side, I always feel blessed and happy. You don't know how much your 1 minute of saying something like that or doing something like that can make my whole day being happy and blessed. So thank you for all your love and support. Thank